Flight attendant tears up black girl's ticket, unaware her father owns the airline. The airport buzzed with the usual tension that seemed to linger around hurried travelers. Amidst the busy concourse, a young girl named Amara stood near the gate, her eyes shining with anticipation. She was traveling alone for the first time, returning home after attending a leadership conference for teens. The hum of the terminal was filled with the squeak of rolling luggage, the beep of intercom announcements, and snippets of conversations from strangers. Amara wore a neatly pressed button-down shirt and jeans, clutching her ticket and passport. Her heart pounded with a mix of excitement and nervousness. She was well aware of her father's influence, but he had always taught her that a person's worth was not defined by material success and that humility cost nothing. Still, she couldn't shake the slight unease that crept in whenever she was in public spaces where no one knew who she was or who her father happened to be. She took a deep breath, repeating his words in her mind. Good character and kindness mattered more than anything else. Approaching the gate counter, she offered a polite smile to the flight attendant, whose name tag read Gloria. Gloria barely acknowledged her, her lips tightening into a thin line as she scanned the ticket. Her eyes flickered over Amara's face, lingering on her braids, before glancing down at the name on the ticket. "Are you traveling alone?" Gloria asked, her tone sharp. "Yes, ma'am," Amara answered quietly. "I'm heading home to see my family." Gloria's gaze swept over her once more, a silent assessment that Amara had encountered before. She had grown used to subtle stares, but she usually ignored them. There was no reason to expect anything unusual. She handed over her passport, waiting for the standard check of her seat assignment and identity. Gloria gave a brisk nod as she returned the passport, but her scrutiny of the ticket deepened, as if something were amiss. A subtle shift in the attendant's posture set off warning bells in Amara's mind. There was something rigid and guarded about her stance, reminding Amara of teachers who had doubted her abilities when she was younger, the ones who always seemed to scrutinize her work more than that of her classmates. A ripple of unease ran through her, but she remained composed, determined not to cause a scene. "This ticket doesn't look valid," Gloria declared, her voice carrying a note of finality. Amara's brow furrowed as she glanced at the slip of paper in Gloria's hand. "It's definitely valid. I confirmed everything this morning before leaving the conference." "It doesn't look valid to me," Gloria repeated, her voice growing louder. A few travelers turned their heads, curiosity sparking in their eyes. Heat rushed to Amara's cheeks, a mix of embarrassment and frustration. She wanted to handle this calmly, knowing that losing her temper would accomplish nothing. "This ticket was booked by my father's office," she explained, keeping her tone even. Gloria scoffed, waving off the explanation. "Sure it was. I've seen plenty of passengers like you trying to get on flights they don't belong on." Amara's breath caught in her throat. "Passengers like you." The words hit her like a slap. Her earlier suspicion about Gloria's attitude solidified. Her father had warned her about moments like these, when people would judge before knowing anything. Still, she kept her voice steady. "I promise this is a legitimate ticket," she insisted. "Maybe you could try scanning it again?" Gloria rolled her eyes dismissively, letting silence stretch between them. Then, in a sudden motion that stunned everyone nearby, she tore the ticket in half. The sound of ripping paper sliced through the airport's background noise. Amara's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "That's my ticket." Gloria didn't even look at her. "Move along, little girl," she said coldly. "I'm not letting you board with a fraudulent ticket. Go find another flight, if you can afford one." A hush fell over the area. A few bystanders whispered among themselves, some exchanging uncertain glances. A couple of them looked as if they wanted to intervene, but no one stepped forward. Amara's hands trembled as she clutched the torn halves of her ticket. Embarrassment burned through her, quickly morphing into anger. She could call her father and have him fix this in an instant, but she despised drawing attention that way. She had always wanted to stand on her own, but this was beyond anything she had experienced before. Taking a slow, measured breath, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of Gloria. Instead, she dialed her father's number, steadying her voice before he picked up. "Amara." His voice was warm but laced with concern. "You should be boarding soon. Everything okay?" She hesitated for only a second. "Dad, there's a problem. The flight attendant said my ticket was fraudulent." And she tore it up. A heavy silence followed. Then her father cleared his throat, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. "Where exactly are you standing?" Amara told her father where she was, and he assured her everything would be taken care of. She ended the call, still trembling from the incident. Glancing around, she noticed the reactions of other passengers. Some stared at her with pity, others with curiosity, and a few awkwardly looked away, as if they didn't want to acknowledge what had just happened. Amara wished she could disappear. She didn't want to cause a scene or start a confrontation, but she also knew she had done nothing wrong. Meanwhile, across the country, her father, Jonathan Coates, sat in an office that few people ever imagined existed. He was the quiet force behind one of the world's largest airlines, an empire that had grown from a small charter service decades ago. Over the years, he had expanded partnerships, strengthened routes, and ensured the company maintained a strong, modern reputation. More than anything, he took pride in treating his employees with respect. There were countless stories of how he had personally stepped in to help staff during times of crisis, making sure they were taken care of. To Jonathan, success meant nothing without fairness and compassion. Hearing the distress in his daughter's voice sent a rare surge of protective anger through him. He was not one to flaunt his status. He preferred to let his work speak for itself. But this incident crossed the line. He knew exactly what it looked like when prejudice reared its head. Rising from his desk, he made a brief phone call to his executive assistant, issuing swift instructions. Then, without another word, he strode out of the office, his movements sharper and more determined than usual. His employees watched him go, sensing the tension in his expression. Within minutes, he was in the back of a sleek black company car, heading straight to the airport. Amara didn't know exactly what her father was doing, but she had faith in him. She chose to remain near the gate, refusing to let anyone chase her away. She had every right to be there. She observed Gloria assisting other passengers, her demeanor polite but forced. Yet, whenever the flight attendant's gaze flicked toward Amara, the same disapproving look lingered in her eyes. Amara couldn't help but wonder how someone like Gloria had secured a job as a flight attendant. Weren't they supposed to assist and guide passengers, not humiliate them in public? As she waited, she thought back to a conversation she once had with her father. He had always kept a low profile, wanting his children to understand the value of hard work and humility. He had told her that everyone deserved respect, from the wealthiest executives to the most ordinary workers. In life, you'll encounter people who can't see past their own biases, he had warned. Handle them with grace. Know your worth. And if it ever comes down to it, remember, I will always have your back. A quiet sense of relief settled over her, knowing he was on his way. She held the torn remains of her ticket in her hands, briefly considering approaching Gloria again. But the humiliating memory of what had just happened held her back. Instead, she found a seat by the window, watching planes taxi in the distance. Her mind wandered to the friends she had made at the leadership conference. They had shared stories of their dreams. Some wanted to be astronauts, entrepreneurs, or humanitarian activists. One had spoken about being the first in his family to graduate college. Their passion had inspired her, making her own ambitions feel clearer. She wasn't sure which path she would take yet, but she knew moments like this, where she had to stand firm against injustice, would shape her future. Time ticked by, and soon she felt her phone vibrate. It was a message from Jonathan. "I'm here. Meet me by the information kiosk." Amara stood up, still feeling nervous. She caught Gloria's narrowed gaze once more but didn't look away. Instead, she gave a polite nod, one that Gloria chose not to return. Navigating through the busy terminal, Amara weaved past frantic travelers, families with strollers, and backpackers rushing to their gates. Then, she saw him, her father, standing near a digital display board showing flight departures and arrivals. He was dressed in a crisp suit, not flashy, but polished enough to make it clear he was no ordinary passenger. The moment she saw him, she had to fight back the lump rising in her throat. He pulled her into a hug, and the tension she had been carrying finally began to ease. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," Jonathan said quietly. She swallowed hard. "Dad, she tore my ticket in half, right in front of everyone. She practically called me a fraud." His expression darkened, his jaw tightening. "Let's address it," he said firmly. "Stay by my side." Together, they walked toward the gate area. Several airline staff recognized Jonathan immediately, their expressions shifting from confusion to alarm as they rushed to greet him. Their uneasy glances flicked between him and Amara, realizing that something was very, very wrong. Jonathan remained calm, his voice steady as he asked for the supervisor on duty. A staff member pointed toward an older man in a dark blazer standing near the check-in counters. Jonathan led Amara in that direction, ignoring the stares of passing travelers. As they approached, the supervisor, whose name tag read Richard, looked up and immediately stiffened, startled by the sight of Jonathan Coates standing before him. "Mr. Coates?" Richard said, clearing his throat. "Is there something I can assist you with?" Jonathan's tone remained polite but firm. "Yes, Richard. My daughter's ticket was torn apart by one of your employees. I'd like to understand why." Shock flickered across Richard's face as his gaze shifted to Amara. He noticed the torn halves of the ticket still clutched in her hand and visibly paled. "Destroyed? That's highly unprofessional. Who was responsible?" Before Amara could respond, Gloria stepped forward. She attempted to maintain a confident posture, but her voice wavered slightly. "I found the ticket suspicious, sir. I have to uphold the integrity of our flights." Jonathan, still composed, raised a hand. "You destroyed a valid ticket. Even if you had doubts about its authenticity, there are proper procedures. You don't humiliate a passenger or destroy their property. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done?" Gloria hesitated, clearly struggling for words. She glanced briefly at Amara but avoided direct eye contact. I did what I thought was right. I've seen a lot of counterfeit tickets before." Richard quickly stepped in, trying to de-escalate the situation. "Mr. Coates, let's move to a private area to discuss this further. There's no need for a public scene." Amara considered protesting, but when she saw her father's slight nod, she understood. He valued keeping things professional. They followed Richard down a short corridor to a small staff area behind the check-in counter, furnished with a desk and a few chairs. Gloria trailed behind, her expression wavering between defiance and unease. Jonathan motioned for Amara to take a seat before turning to Richard. "I'm not here to create unnecessary trouble, but this situation needs to be addressed. My daughter was treated unfairly, and just so you're aware, I personally paid for her ticket in full through legitimate channels. There was no reason for any of this to happen." Richard nodded, wringing his hands. "I completely agree, sir. This is unacceptable, and I sincerely apologize on behalf of the airline." Gloria opened her mouth as if to defend herself but quickly shut it. Amara observed her, feeling a mix of frustration and disappointment. This was an opportunity for Gloria to acknowledge her mistake, to take responsibility. Jonathan's voice was calm but resolute. "Our company prides itself on treating all passengers with respect, regardless of their background. If an employee demonstrates bias, it's not just a personal failure. It undermines the values we stand for." Richard cleared his throat. "Of course, sir. We'll take immediate disciplinary action." He turned to Amara, his expression genuinely apologetic. "Miss, I'm truly sorry. We'll do everything we can to make this right." Amara swallowed hard and nodded. "Thank you. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just want to go home." Jonathan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder before turning to Gloria. His voice was measured. "Do you have anything to say to my daughter?" Gloria's face remained tense, but for a brief moment, guilt flickered in her eyes. She exhaled shakily. I'm sorry if I offended you." Amara remained silent for a few moments, letting the words settle. But something about Gloria's apology felt more obligatory than sincere. She glanced at her father, who gave a small nod, encouraging her to respond. "I accept your apology," Amara said softly, "but I hope you understand the weight of what you did. This isn't just about a ticket. It's about the way you treated me." Gloria pressed her lips into a thin line, her knuckles gripping the edge of the desk. She didn't respond. Whether she fully understood the impact of her actions or simply refused to admit fault, Amara couldn't tell. A pang of disappointment settled in her chest. She had always wanted to believe that people could change if given the right guidance. Jonathan concluded the meeting swiftly. He turned to Richard. "I trust you'll handle the necessary steps. For now, I just want to ensure my daughter can board her flight." Richard hurriedly arranged for a replacement ticket, this time in first class. He apologized repeatedly, promising to follow up on the matter. Jonathan thanked him curtly. Without sparing Gloria another glance, he led Amara back into the terminal. Before heading to the gate, Jonathan pulled Amara aside, his expression softening. "Are you all right? That was a lot to deal with." Amara managed a small smile. "I'm okay. I guess this is exactly what you warned me about." Jonathan sighed. "It doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make it any easier." They made their way to a lounge area where they could talk in private. Amara sank into a comfortable chair, her father sitting across from her. She noticed a few airport employees stealing glances at Jonathan, likely recognizing him. A mixture of pride and lingering humiliation swirled inside her. Jonathan leaned forward, folding his hands. "Your flight leaves soon. If you'd like, I can fly with you. I have a meeting back home anyway." Amara appreciated the offer. The thought of having her father beside her for the flight brought a sense of comfort after everything that had happened. She agreed, and within minutes, Jonathan had secured a ticket for himself. When they returned to the gate, Gloria was nowhere to be seen. Richard was there, offering a forced smile and wishing them a pleasant journey. Amara noticed how the other gate agents suddenly seemed extra attentive, guiding them toward the jet bridge with particular care. Once on board, Amara and her father settled into their spacious first-class seats. She glanced around at the plush surroundings, feeling slightly out of place. She usually chose to fly economy, preferring to experience the world without unnecessary luxuries. Her father's status had always afforded her certain privileges, but this time, Amara chose to embrace the convenience. She wanted space to clear her mind. As the plane filled, she watched passengers maneuver through the narrow aisles, searching for overhead bin space, settling into their seats, wrangling restless children. She noticed a subtle shift in the cabin's atmosphere. People were beginning to recognize her father. Some had likely seen him in business magazines or interviews. The contrast was striking. Just an hour ago, she had been treated as if she were insignificant. But now, because of her father's presence, she received subtle nods of respect. It was a jarring reminder of how society often measured worth based on status. Once they were buckled in and the plane taxied to the runway, Amara let out a slow breath. As the engines roared and the plane lifted off, she leaned back against the seat, feeling the tension begin to dissipate. She glanced at her father, who gave her a reassuring smile. "Get some rest," he suggested. "It's been a long day." She closed her eyes, but her thoughts refused to settle. Would Gloria actually face consequences, or would this incident be quietly swept under the rug like so many others? A part of her was relieved that justice, in some form, had been served. But another part of her knew that not everyone had the luxury of calling their father to fix an unjust situation. Many people faced discrimination daily with no one to stand up for them. She drifted into a light sleep, but flashes of the day's events played in her mind. Gloria's cold stare, the sound of the ticket ripping, the way the travelers in the terminal had gawked at the scene. By the time the plane landed, she felt even more drained than before. Jonathan gently touched her shoulder, waking her. They disembarked, stepping into the airport, a place that smelled familiar, filled with memories of her father meeting her after past trips. As they entered the arrivals area, A uniformed driver stood waiting for them. Jonathan's phone buzzed non-stop with messages and calls, but he ignored them, choosing instead to focus on Amara. During the drive home, she gazed out the window at the towering skyscrapers, the flashing billboards, and the people hurrying along the sidewalks. Her mind turned to what came next. Should she simply move on from this experience? Or was there a way to turn it into something meaningful? Jonathan seemed to sense her thoughts. "I plan to make sure the airline reviews its policies," he said gently. "No one should be treated the way you were." Amara nodded slowly. "I understand, but maybe we can do more." He glanced at her, intrigued. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath, recalling the people she had met at the leadership conference. "I met some incredible individuals who are working on diversity training programs for businesses, nonprofits, and schools. What if we encouraged something like that for the airline? Something more than just a corporate policy. Something that truly educates employees on bias and discrimination." A thoughtful expression crossed Jonathan's face. "That's not a bad idea. It wouldn't just prevent situations like this. It could strengthen the company's culture as a whole." Amara felt a surge of determination. "I can reach out to some of the contacts I made. I think they'd be eager to help." Jonathan smiled, pride evident in his eyes. "I'd like that. Let's talk more once we're home. For now, let's rest. In the morning, we'll take action." As they drove through the city, the lights shimmered in a bright mosaic outside the car window. Amara exhaled slowly, feeling a mix of relief and renewed purpose. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. People like Gloria existed in every industry. But she also believed that change was possible, even if it started with small steps. When they arrived home, a modest yet elegant residence chosen by Jonathan for its warmth and comfort, Amara felt the last of the day's tension ease. Familiar staff greeted them with kind smiles. In the foyer, her mother, Angela, hurried toward her, her face lighting up at the sight of her daughter. They embraced tightly before Angela stepped back, concern creasing her features. "I heard what happened. Are you okay?" She glanced at Jonathan for an explanation. Amara gave a reassuring nod. "I'm fine, Mom." It was humiliating, but Dad helped. Angela sighed, gently brushing Amara's braids away from her face. "I can't believe someone would treat you like that. I'm just grateful you're home safe." Jonathan wrapped an arm around both of them, pulling them close. "We'll talk more in the morning," he said. "Tonight, let's have a quiet dinner, rest, and then decide on the best way forward." Amara agreed. She retreated to her room, letting the familiar comfort of home settle around her. She placed her suitcase in the corner and collapsed onto her bed, exhausted. But her thoughts still swirled. Why had Gloria been so quick to judge her? Would the airline truly take action? And how many other passengers had experienced similar injustices without anyone to defend them? Despite the lingering unease, exhaustion finally overtook her. She drifted into a restless sleep, dreaming of airport gates, torn tickets, and a future where she could help change the kind of system that allowed such treatment to exist. In the morning, she woke to soft sunlight streaming through her window. After showering and dressing casually, she made her way downstairs. The smell of breakfast filled the air. Her father stood by the living room windows, pacing as he spoke on the phone. In the kitchen, her mother flipped pancakes, the warm scent filling the house. Humming softly, Amara stepped forward to help her mother, measuring out coffee grounds. Angela paused, giving her a concerned look. "Any dreams?" she asked gently. Amara nodded, forcing a small laugh. "The usual replays of humiliating moments. But I feel better now." Angela sighed sympathetically. "You know we're here for you. Your father will handle the official side of things. But if you ever want to talk, I'm always here." Amara appreciated the offer. She looked up from the bowl of batter just as Jonathan ended his phone call. He walked into the kitchen, setting his phone on the table, a serious expression on his face. "I spoke with Richard again," he announced. "It looks like the flight attendant is being suspended while they conduct an investigation. They're also planning a meeting to discuss new training procedures." Amara felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that action was being taken, but sadness that it was even necessary. "That's a start," Angela said, handing Jonathan a cup of coffee. "I just hope something long-term comes from this." A suspension alone might not change her perspective. Jonathan nodded in agreement, taking a sip. "Exactly. One disciplinary action won't fix everything, but this could be an opportunity to create broader change." He gestured for Amara to join him at the dining table. Angela brought over a plate of pancakes, and they settled in. Taking a deep breath, Amara felt a growing sense of determination. "I'd like to reach out to some of my colleagues from the conference. We could develop a program specifically aimed at addressing bias and discrimination. Then we could pitch it to the airline's board." Angela and Jonathan exchanged approving looks. "That's exactly what I was thinking," Jonathan said. "We can start by reaching out to board members, but we'll need a formal proposal." Excitement surged through Amara. "I can start working on it today. I'll message my friends and see how quickly we can put something together." Angela smiled warmly as she cut a piece of pancake. "I love seeing you like this, turning a negative experience into something positive. That's what real leaders do." Amara returned the smile. Despite the unpleasant events of the previous day, she now felt a renewed sense of purpose. After breakfast, she retrieved her laptop and settled into the family's study. She sent messages to two of her conference colleagues who had spoken extensively about diversity initiatives. She explained the situation and asked if they would be interested in collaborating on a pilot program for the airline. Within minutes, enthusiastic replies came in. They arranged a video call for that afternoon. Meanwhile, Jonathan made calls to set up an initial meeting with the airline's board of directors. He had enough influence to secure a conversation quickly, but he wanted to ensure that their proposal would be well-structured and full of actionable solutions. Angela also contributed insights from her experience in nonprofit work, having volunteered extensively in community outreach programs. By midday, they had a clear framework for their goals. When the video call with her colleagues began, Amara laid out the plan, explaining how the conference had inspired her to take action. They discussed designing training modules that would go beyond generic sensitivity training. Instead, they would focus on systemic biases, incorporate real-life experiences, interactive exercises, and continuous follow-up sessions. The goal was to help participants reflect on their own behaviors and assumptions in a meaningful way. Her friends contributed additional ideas, referencing research and models from existing diversity programs. Amara took rapid notes, occasionally muting herself to discuss details with Jonathan, who sat nearby. By the end of the call, she felt a sense of real progress. This wasn't just about disciplining one flight attendant. It was about potentially creating lasting change within the company. She knew it was ambitious to expect a large corporation to shift its culture overnight, but she believed it was worth trying. Over the next few days, she and Jonathan worked closely to refine the proposal. They included thorough documentation, statistics on how diversity training could improve employee satisfaction, reduce turnover, and enhance the airline's reputation. They also incorporated personal anecdotes, though Amara chose to keep her name out of the official narrative. She wanted the focus to be on the larger issue, not just her personal experience. Finally, the day arrived for them to present their proposal to a subset of the airline's board. As they stepped into the sleek conference room on an upper floor of the airline's headquarters, Amara felt a nervous flutter in her stomach. Around the table sat half a dozen board members, along with several senior executives. They all stood in acknowledgement when Jonathan entered, but he quickly directed attention to Amara, making it clear that she was leading the initiative. Taking her seat at the head of the table, with her father beside her, Amara took a steadying breath. Then, with confidence, she began to present their plan. She spoke clearly, outlining the key points. She described the real-life consequences of discrimination, not just for passengers, but for the airline's brand and reputation. She emphasized how a forward-thinking, values-driven training program could set the airline apart, positioning it as a leader in inclusivity and corporate responsibility. Some board members nodded in agreement, showing interest in the proposal. Others appeared more skeptical, flipping through the documents in front of them. An older woman named Cynthia, one of the board members, leaned forward. "This is an interesting concept," she said, "but let's talk logistics. What about the cost and feasibility?" Amara listened attentively and addressed each concern, referencing the research they had gathered. Jonathan added his perspective, emphasizing the financial benefits, arguing that the cost was an investment in the airline's reputation and its potential to attract new customers. The meeting lasted over an hour. When it finally concluded, Cynthia gave a measured smile. "This is ambitious, but I see the merit," she said. "We will definitely discuss it further at the full board meeting." Jonathan shook hands with the executives, thanking them for their time. Amara felt a rush of relief. It wasn't a final victory, but it was a positive first step. Her father turned to her as they left the building. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "No matter what the board decides, you made a strong case for change." She smiled, letting out a breath of tension. "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done this without your support." He patted her shoulder. "This is just the beginning." In the following days, the airline's internal investigation continued. Richard kept Jonathan updated regularly. Gloria had been placed on unpaid leave while the company reviewed passenger statements, video footage, and any previous complaints. It turned out that Amara wasn't the first to raise concerns about her behavior. Jonathan remained neutral, letting the investigation run its course. He believed in due process, though a part of him longed for Gloria to never treat another passenger that way again. As for Amara, her life seemed to return to normal on the surface. She attended her classes, hung out with friends, and worked on extracurricular activities. However, she felt a subtle shift inside her, a sense of determination ignited by that humiliating incident. She knew that once the airline board made its decision, she would be ready to see the initiative through. One afternoon, she was at home studying, sunlight streaming through the window, when she heard her father call her name from downstairs. She set aside her textbooks and hurried to find him standing by the front door, phone in hand. He motioned for her to come closer. "It's Richard," he said quietly. "He wants to speak with you." Amara felt her heartbeat quicken. She took the phone, greeting Richard politely. He sounded relieved. "I wanted you to know that after a thorough review, the airline has decided to terminate Gloria's employment. There was clear evidence of multiple discriminatory incidents." Amara was silent for a few seconds, processing the news. She didn't feel joy or pity. Instead, she felt a sense of justice and inevitability. "Thank you for letting me know," she said, her voice steady. Richard continued, "We've also presented your proposal to the board. There's a lot of enthusiasm for implementing a new training program. The final vote will be next week, but it looks promising." Amara felt a flutter of excitement in her chest. "That's great to hear. I really hope it makes a difference." Richard's tone grew more earnest. "I believe it can. It's unfortunate that it took an incident like yours to prompt action, but I'm grateful you're pushing for lasting change." After ending the call, Amara handed the phone back to her father, who looked at her with a questioning gaze. She relayed the news about Gloria and the upcoming vote from the board. Jonathan placed a hand on her shoulder. "How do you feel?" he asked. She exhaled slowly. "It's bittersweet. I don't want anyone to lose their job, but what she did was wrong. At least now the company seems serious about addressing the issue." Jonathan nodded, understanding. "Your empathy is one of your best qualities. But remember, accountability is important too. You handled this with grace." She offered him a small smile. "Let's see what happens next week." The day of the full board vote arrived faster than expected. Jonathan received an invitation for them to attend in person to hear the final decision. Amara felt the same nervous energy as before. She dressed in a professional outfit and accompanied her father to the company's headquarters. Once again, the room was larger, filled with more board members and executives, all wearing sharp suits and exchanging polite greetings. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Cynthia was there, along with others whom Amara had seen only briefly at previous gatherings. A quiet hush fell as everyone took their seats. The meeting began with formalities, including updates on the airline's quarterly performance, route expansions, and financial reports. Amara shifted in her seat, feeling a twinge of impatience. She understood this was part of the corporate process, but she couldn't help but want them to get to the point. Finally, they reached the agenda item concerning the proposed diversity and bias training initiative. A senior board member introduced the topic, briefly summarizing the situation. There was a recent incident involving unacceptable employee behavior, he said carefully, not naming names. This led to a proposal spearheaded by Mr. Jonathan Coates and his daughter Amara to revamp our training. The materials have been circulated, and today we'll vote on whether to implement the proposal across all divisions. He gestured toward Amara. She gave a brief nod, feeling a flush rise to her cheeks. She hadn't expected to speak again, but the board member invited her to share a few words. Her heart pounded as she rose and faced the room. "Thank you for considering this proposal," she began. "We believe this kind of training can not only prevent discrimination but also foster a more inclusive, empathetic environment that benefits everyone, employees, passengers, and the overall reputation of the airline." She kept her remarks brief and to the point before sitting back down. A hushed silence settled over the room. The senior board member cleared his throat. "Let's proceed to the vote." Several board members raised their hands in favor. Amara's eyes scanned the room, her heart racing. A few hesitated, but eventually nearly all hands were raised. Only one or two lingered, but they too voted in favor. The measure passed with overwhelming support. Amara felt a wave of relief and pride wash over her. The senior board member offered a congratulatory smile. "We will move forward with the development and rollout of this program as soon as possible, Mr. Coates, Amara. We'd like to coordinate with you on the next steps." They thanked him graciously, and after the formal meeting ended, a few executives approached Amara to shake her hand and express their enthusiasm for the initiative. She felt a rush of validation. The humiliating incident at the airport had turned into a catalyst for meaningful change. She hoped it would set a precedent not just for this airline, but maybe for others in the industry if the results were positive. Leaving the boardroom, Jonathan slipped an arm around her shoulders. "Well done," he murmured. "This is going to help a lot of people." She smiled up at him, grateful for his unwavering support. "Thanks, Dad. I'm just glad we're making progress." They headed back to the car. Amara stared at the towering buildings around them, reflecting on how quickly life could change. One day, she was just another passenger quietly going about her business. The next, she'd become an inadvertent catalyst for corporate transformation. She felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She also felt that this was just the first chapter in her journey. There was still a lot of work to be done. Over the following weeks, Amara juggled her usual responsibilities with her involvement in shaping the new training program. Her friends from the conference stepped in, offering their expertise. Airline executives set up committees to oversee the process, scheduling regular check-ins. Amara attended meetings via video calls, sometimes after finishing her homework at night, her laptop propped on her desk. She was learning about corporate structures, adult responsibilities, and the complexities of rolling out a program that would affect thousands of employees worldwide. Meanwhile, Jonathan used his influence tactfully, ensuring that resources were properly allocated and that the executive team took the initiative seriously. He also stepped back at times, allowing Amara and her colleagues to lead the creative and educational aspects. Amara appreciated that balance. It helped her gain confidence while still having a safety net if she needed it. During this period, media outlets caught wind of the airline's new program. Some journalists speculated about the reasons behind the initiative. The official statements remained vague about the specific incident. Amara preferred it that way. She didn't seek public attention or sympathy. She only wanted the program to stand on its own merits. Still, word leaked out on a few social media platforms that the initiative was sparked by Jonathan Coates' daughter. People shared the story in fragments, praising the airline for taking steps to address racism, though the details were often incomplete or sensationalized. Amara began receiving messages from strangers who claimed they, too, had faced discrimination from flight attendants or other service professionals. She responded politely, offering encouragement and directing them to the airline's newly reformed complaint channels. She recognized how widespread such issues were. It strengthened her resolve to see the training program through. One evening, after a long day of conference calls and planning sessions, Amara sat on the living room couch with her mother, flipping through channels. They paused on a local news segment discussing new corporate diversity initiatives across various industries. One of the examples cited was her father's airline. Amara listened intently, hearing the reporter briefly mention an incident that catalyzed the entire program. She felt a strange sense of pride and humility. Angela muted the TV. "You're doing good work," she said softly. Amara leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "It feels surreal sometimes, but it also feels right." The following week marked the official launch of the pilot program. The first modules were rolled out to a select group of employees, supervisors, HR managers, and some volunteer flight crew members who agreed to test the materials. Amara and her colleagues monitored the sessions through feedback forms and video recordings, making real-time adjustments as necessary. Some participants reacted positively, sharing that they had never examined their own biases so closely before. Others were skeptical, feeling it was unnecessary, but overall, the initial response seemed promising. As word spread internally, more employees signed up to participate voluntarily, even before it became mandatory. This wave of interest reassured Amara that they were on the right track. She, Jonathan, and the rest of their small team continued refining the content, preparing it for a company-wide rollout. About a month after the pilot began, the airline announced that all employees, regardless of role or rank, all employees, including top executives, ground staff, pilots, and flight attendants, would now be required to complete the training. Amara paused for a moment to reflect on how much had changed since the day Gloria tore up her ticket. She thought about how one instance of cruelty had sparked a conversation and led to action. That same week, Jonathan and Amara were invited to attend a gathering at an airport lounge where employees who had completed the pilot training would share their experiences. Amara was nervous, but also excited to meet the real people behind the statistics she'd been tracking. When they arrived, they found a room filled with employees from various backgrounds, all wearing name tags. Some recognized Amara and approached her with words of gratitude or curious questions. A flight attendant named Maria admitted that she had initially doubted the need for such training. "I always thought I treated everyone equally," Maria said. "But the sessions made me realize that sometimes our subconscious biases can affect how we interact with passengers. I caught myself being extra short-tempered with people who reminded me of a difficult passenger I once had." Amara nodded, listening carefully. "I'm glad the program helped you see that." Maria smiled. "Yes, and now I'm more intentional in how I treat people, especially if I sense I'm jumping to conclusions. Thank you for championing this." Another staff member, a security officer named Malik, said he appreciated the practical tips on de-escalation and empathy. "I've seen a lot of tension at airports. People are stressed, worried about flights, luggage, missing connections. It's easy for misunderstandings to escalate. This training gave me new tools." Amara felt warmth in her heart as she listened to their testimonials. At one point, laughter rippled through the room as employees shared stories of awkward moments. It was a stark contrast to the hostility she had faced at the gate. She realized that for every Gloria, there were dozens of employees who genuinely wanted to improve. Towards the end of the gathering, Richard, the supervisor who had handled Amara's complaint, approached. He looked more relaxed than the first time they'd met. "It's been quite a journey," he said with a smile. "I never imagined we'd be here, launching this company-wide, but I'm glad we are." Amara returned his smile. "Me too." He paused, then added, "I hear you'll be attending college soon. Any idea what you want to major in?" She shrugged lightly. "I'm considering business, maybe with a minor in social impact or something related. I want to keep these efforts going, whether it's in my father's company or somewhere else." Richard nodded approvingly. "The world could use more leaders like you." Amara blushed slightly at the compliment and thanked him. Glancing across the room, she spotted her father in a lively discussion with a group of employees, laughing wholeheartedly at some anecdote they shared. She felt a surge of affection and gratitude. He had always taught her to stand up for herself and for others when something was wrong. As the night wore on and the crowd began to thin, Jonathan and Amara prepared to head home. On their way out, a manager pulled Jonathan aside for a quick question, leaving Amara near the exit alone. She turned to observe the bustling terminal beyond the lounge's windows. Flights were arriving and departing, and announcements echoed over the PA system. A sense of closure washed over her. Though the fight for equality and fair treatment was far from over, she had found a tangible way to contribute. Sensing someone behind her, she turned. An older flight attendant, not part of the official gathering, stood there. She wore a neat uniform and a warm expression. "I heard about what happened to you," the woman said quietly. "I just wanted to say I'm so sorry you went through that, and I'm grateful for what you're doing. Most of us do our best to welcome passengers. We hate to see someone tarnish our profession." Amara's eyes glistened. "Thank you for saying that, and thank you for your work. I know the majority of flight attendants are dedicated and caring." The woman nodded and walked away, disappearing into the bustling corridor. Amara inhaled deeply, letting the moment sink in. Every step of this journey, from her ticket being torn to spearheading a corporate initiative, had been a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, humiliation, fear, hope, and now, cautious optimism. Jonathan finished his brief conversation and joined her, placing a comforting hand on her back. "Ready to go home?" She smiled. "Yes, more than ready." They headed out together, father and daughter, stepping into the hum of the airport. The knowledge of what they had accomplished hung in the air around them like an invisible banner of hope. Not everyone's perspective would shift overnight, and not every passenger's experience would suddenly improve, but they had ignited a spark. Amara believed that sparks, when nurtured, could become lasting flames. As they walked, Amara held her head high, reminding herself of the lesson she had learned in the most unexpected way. If one person could tear a ticket and strip away a traveler's dignity, then another person could mend what was broken and forge something stronger and better in its place. Did you enjoy the story of ambition, courage, and the power of one voice to spark change? Let us know in the comments what part resonated with you the most or which character's journey surprised you. We love hearing your thoughts. And if you want more stories like this, full of twists, heart, and inspiration, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There's plenty more where this came from, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey.